Assalamu alaikum and welcome back. You're watching Let's Talk. Now, we've got a special program for you today. We are discussing the cuts in the legal aid system and whether they are mirroring what is actually needed in the ground with the ordinary people in society. Now, just before we went off air, we had some very interesting calls, which I will ask my distinguished panel to discuss with me. And of course give you the answers. If you would like to participate in this program, there is a number at the bottom of your screens. Do feel free to dial in and comment and participate in this program. Just a reminder, my distinguished guest today, I have George Campanella, who is from EBR Attridge, which is the biggest criminal legal aid firm in the United Kingdom. I have Mahtab Aziz, who is a solicitor with Whitworth Solicitors, Whitworth Green Solicitors, and I also have David Malone, who is a leading barrister from Red Lion Chambers in London. If I could start off with David and come back on some of the points that have been raised by our viewers. A couple of points in particular. First of all, we had a caller speaking about domestic violence and how victims of those vulnerable people may well have certain issues and be affected by the cuts in legal aid. And we also had Rabia from Birmingham, who put it down to wider society as a whole and left it to social problems, which are the cause of the difficulties which people face, and that they should not specifically be directed to, or the finger should not be pointed to the legal aid cuts. What are your observations, please?
Well, the first thing to say about this, domestic violence is a huge problem. It's a huge problem across the communities in the UK. Where I am in the metropolis, it's a huge problem for the Metropolitan Police Service. It's the one area with serious violent crime that's dramatically on the increase in terms of reported crime. The Met are celebrating that in a muted way, if I can put it that way. And the reason is because the Met want people and other police forces to report domestic violence, where previously it was brushed under the carpet, and they came in for a stinging attack along with other agencies dealing with criminal justice, at the start of the year for less reporting of these sorts of crime. But domestic violence is a huge issue, and it can account for actually the increase in sort of serious violent crime. And the caller was right. For those women, it's mainly women. It also affects men in the community as well. And obviously it affects the children of families very greatly in communities searching for legal assistance and help. There's a paucity of help because of the various legal aid cuts. And that's something that needs to be addressed. I think only this week there's been a High Court judgment which has become apparent. Readers, your viewers may have seen it in the newspapers, where a High Court judge has written to the Home Secretary and asking about representation in family cases. So it's a huge, huge problem. Touching what Rabina said, last caller, I mean, here is somebody, I say this as a former local councillor in Lambeth, I think quite easily stands to be a councillor, totally understands the problems and gets it. It's about prevention, not the cure. And we know as a community where the problems are going to start and how the problems are going to arise. We can talk about excluded children from school, for example. And what it really is about the government making choices to get resources, because it's all about choices at the end of the day. I mean, George talks about austerity, and there is austerity, but any government that's in is going to have to make choices about where they spend their money. And one of the areas where there must be spending is on our youth. You invest in your youth, and that is your future. And your caller is absolutely right upon that. And there is a paucity of facilities for young people in this country. And again, there have been devastating cuts on our local councils. But what we're saying today is, when one talks about when you have that incident that's committed, when your young one's accused of doing something, when they're dragged into that particular police station, there needs to be a cure. And with the cuts in legal aid, those cures will no longer become available to the average person, the average member of the public on the streets. And that's how real, and that's how serious the problem is.
David, that's very fascinating. I must cut you off because we've got a caller waiting, if you don't mind if I take the call. Hello, Assalamu alaikum, caller.
Hello, Assalamu
Jee, walaikum salam.
Brother, I'd just like to ask the panel,
yes.
What are the implications of the budget cuts? We've spoken a lot about the cuts, but what are the actual implications and what will be the impact for the layperson who is wanting or who has to use, the legal aid?
Right, okay, very good. Have you actually got any acquaintances or people that, or any experiences with the cuts in the legal aid? Have you seen someone affected by the cuts in the legal aid by any sort of...
No, not really, just what I read in the media. So,
right.
But it'd be interesting to find out from a professional point of view what the panel think. Will there be less time to support defendants and such like?
Okay, very good question. In fact, perhaps if I could ask George to touch on that. So, what is the reality on the ground? How does how do the cuts affect the people, the defendants?
Well, I think the main difficulty is access to justice. So that is the main problem. Now, the knock-on effect, I'd just like to make it clear to the caller that the knock-on effects in relation to the cuts in legal aid is yet to be seen widespread. This is something which inevitably will take place in due course, because at the moment, and I'm just speaking, so just so that the caller is aware, I'm speaking in relation to cuts in criminal legal aid. There are two waves of cuts. There's one cut that's already come in, that came in on the 20th of March, and there's another cut in the spring. Now, the Justice Minister, Mr Grayling, states that he's going to review everything in the summer of 2016. Now, what I fear as a criminal lawyer, and I'm sure a number of my colleagues, be it solicitors and barristers, fear, is that in the summer of 2016 it's going to be far too late to reverse the damage which would have been caused by all of these cuts. And the damage will be caused by a number of firms, and I'm speaking about a number of reputable firms that have been around for many years, that have represented the likes of various individuals from various communities, from major communities to minority communities. Those firms, sadly, will actually fall by the wayside. And that's where the problem lies, because firms will obviously look to employ individuals who are not so qualified. And you won't have that level of experience which a number of solicitors have at the moment, solicitors that have been around for many years, solicitors that actually pass down their experience to other individuals. So what's going to happen is you're going to have individuals that are not going to be entering into the profession anymore. And that will be barristers and solicitors. And if we take things a little step further, that's going to affect the quality of judges that you have in the future, because there won't be enough people in the profession to actually have that level of experience.
And the type of judges, George, as well.
Absolutely,
yeah.
And David's right about that. It's the type of judges. And let's have no doubts about this whatsoever. The problem is going to come unless Mr Grayling, the Justice Minister, takes a U-turn, and I'm afraid, and if he's listening this evening, he needs to take a U-turn in this. It's not too late, but I'm afraid summer of 2016 will be far too late. The damage will be irreversible.
Irreversible damage. Now, Mahtab Bhai, David spoke earlier on about the austerity situation, the fact that the government is not focusing money on social matters properly and adequately, and what that may mean to the youth within our communities. And I know that you work for a cross-section of the community. You work for, a large different number of, a lot of different communities.
Yeah.
What sort of experiences do you think the youth of those communities will face if these sorts of cuts continue, and that these are, as George was saying, irreversible?
Yeah. As George rightly pointed out, one of the areas will be that the more experienced and therefore the better lawyers will no longer have any incentive to go out and represent these youths, because a lawyer will probably earn double, triple representing a person who wants to save his driving license than he would if he was to go and represent a youth on, say, a theft charge. Now, that theft charge is far more serious for that youth, but unfortunately, what's available is that, according to the legal aid rates, you get a much less senior person coming along, and often they'll be under a lot of pressure, and often that will lead to perhaps them saying, well, you're better off pleading guilty, because lawyers unfortunately have come to a stage where they're probably asking themselves, well, oh, if I do a whole day's trial for this case, take all my day up, I'm going to have to prepare for it quite a number of hours. But if I advise 2 clients to plead guilty, and those cases are much far shorter, then I'm probably sort of better off in time-wise. And that's wrong as far as I'm concerned, but this is what I'm seeing happening, unfortunately. A lot of lawyers are more amenable to giving that sort of advice than perhaps previously, where they would have fought the case. This is one of the negative results from this.
Thank you very much, Matabhai. You actually pick on something very important when you talk about the incentive, because I think when David was talking about getting an email from George at an unsociable hour, he was specifically discussing that particular point, because if you have a situation where there is no incentive or to explore any further avenue of defense for somebody and so forth, you're going to find yourself in a situation where the client is not best served, and that will have serious effects on the quality of representation that people receive, and also the results that come out. We may end up with the kind of situation we have in America, where because of perhaps the public defender system, you have in America the highest incarceration rate of people in the world.
Yes. They have far higher sentences. But if I can just mention this point about domestic violence you touched upon. Now, an aspect of that which I've seen happen is that often, I've often seen this, that obviously I acknowledge that the majority of domestic violence cases are serious and genuine, but there is a smaller percentage where the spouse has fabricated an allegation or exaggerated it. Now, in that scenario, at the magistrate's level, once that sort of evidence is placed before the client and the court, there's more chance that the lawyer who's there these days will advise the client to plead guilty, when in fact he had a defense. But because sort of things are stacked up against him, and he's under pressure, he'll plead to it. And I've seen that happening a lot. And that ultimately results in the long term will be harmful to that person, because if there's children involved, and if he has a domestic violence conviction, he's in...
Matabhai, thank you very much indeed. David, if I could come back to you and perhaps develop this debate very slightly. In terms of victims, now a lot of the time victims of crime perhaps don't come forward because of all sorts of reasons. Sometimes they believe that they will not get the attention of the police and they won't get justice, as it were. There may be all sorts of other reasons as well. Can you please explain very briefly in layman's terms for our viewers whether victims should be coming forward, what they should expect, and how, if any, they will be affected by the dynamics of the judiciary?
Yeah, well, the truth is victims haven't been coming forward. There has been a reversal recently, and there's been a lot of work in this area. I myself, I'm working in a high-profile campaign with my client. It's not her real name, but her pseudonym is Eve Thomas, and we're going to a campaign of what's called Eve's Law. It's something that the Home Office have given a commitment towards. That's the Home Secretary, Theresa May. It's something that the Labour Party came in. They've given a commitment towards making law. And what that's about is really not disclosing the personal details of the safe addresses of victims of domestic violence who want to get away from their partners. Typically it's men against women. It's not always the case. It could be men against men, women against women, adults against children, and all those different scenarios. Victims of violence should expect the very best service of the agencies involved, and the very best care from specialist police officers, specialist lawyers, and they should expect the integrated approach of all the other agencies, such as the housing as well.
David, I must cut you off. We've got a caller who's been waiting for some time. Perhaps if I can take the call and we'll carry on with the discussion. Hello, Assalamu alaikum, caller. Hello.
Hello.
Yes, hello, caller.
I ask it if you can put it through Let's Talk program.
You're speaking live on air. The guests can hear you.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, my name is Mrs. Rahman. I've been community service provider all my life. I've been working with homeless families and children. I'm not a lawyer. My suggestion is to people who's working for the communities, we need to do something about the youth crime. Is the main root we need to look into, because when child's age come 11, there is no facility for children to attend. Parents been pressured to go to work, and until they junior school age, there is childcare facilities. But when they turn 11, there is some youth groups there, but parents doesn't feel safe enough to send their children to those youth groups, because there is lots of activities that happen within the youth group, like drugs and all other activities, and lots of parents don't agree to send their children to those
Mrs. Rahman, what is your question? Because we're of limited time.
So we need to do something about, the government need to do something for the children's safety when they turn 11.
Right, okay, thank you very much for your question. Perhaps if I could go back to David, because I know you've done a lot of work with communities and the public and so forth. Mrs. Rahman basically says that the government needs to do more to provide facilities for juveniles and teenagers as they grow older, to be able to make sure that they're focusing properly and prevent solvent abuse and so forth.
We need to invest in our youth. It's full stop. Our youth are our future. I don't think we've been clearer than that, and I think that only politicians, local politicians, national politicians are listening to this programme, or listen to community stations throughout the UK, you'll get the same message from callers. That's where we need to be putting our resources.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we must go on to another break. We've heard some very interesting thoughts on the legal situation, the dynamics of the legal aid cuts, and what is happening and what is necessary in order to prevent victims of crime in all its guises, whether it's violence or other sorts of guises too. After we come back from the break, we would love to hear from you as well as to what your experiences are, or what thoughts that you may have, or indeed if you have any questions for our panel. Do stay with us.